Good morning. Today is June 14th, 2024, and I have the pleasure of interviewing Sade Tuckett, a Foreign Service officer with the U.S. Department of State. This interview is taking place under the auspices of the American Folklife Center's Archie Green Fellowship. The Folklife Center is part of the Library of Congress. Sade, welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
We're delighted to have you. I'd like to begin this interview by asking you to tell us a little bit about your origin story.
Okay, origin story. I'll keep it broad. My mother is from the U.S. Virgin Islands. My father is from St. Kitts. I was born in the Bronx, New York, where they had moved when they were like teens, tweens age, young children. Um, from growing up in the Bronx and sort of hopping to different schools here and there, my mother's very passionate about giving us a quality education. She's a social worker. I then graduated from New Rochelle and Westchester, then went on to get my bachelor's in psychology from Spelman College. During my time there, I had always been a very artsy kid, but during my time at Spelman, which is a very competitive place. For those who don't know, it's a historically Black college. It's an all or traditionally women's college, and it's very intense. And they expect you to be hyper productive. All free time should be filled with something that you could put on your resume or say that you're changing the world. The motto of Spelman is my choice to change the world, the choice to change the world. So you're actively taught to be a change agent, and rest isn't necessarily included in that. Regardless, I had an amazing experience. I owe so much of who I am to my time at Spelman and to my mom who pushed me to go there. So during that time, I did not have something to do over a summer, and I was devastated. I thought I was just failing at everything. I was going into my junior year. But it was during that still time that the quote unquote 50-day war happened between Palestine and Israel. And I had seen just so many connections between Palestinian struggle for freedom, Black American struggle for freedom, Native American struggle for freedom, and learned of so many Black scholars and revolutionaries also going to Palestine and writing extensively about this. And I was wondering why we hadn't talked enough about this at Spelman. So one of my close friends is Syrian. We teamed up. They really led the whole thing. I was also joining a sorority at the time, so I was a bit occupied. But we were the core group of the first HBCU chapter of Students for Justice in Palestine, where we basically tried to educate people on the very basics of what is Palestine, where is it, what is Israel, where is it, what is the history between these two, and why should it matter to you? And from there, I took as many international relation courses as I could while still getting my BA in psychology. After During that time, I also interned at the Council on Foreign Relations, which was a big shift for me. Thankfully, it was in New York, so I didn't have to travel. And I stayed at my dad's place, went down there, had a really great eye-opening time. It just introduced me into the world of IR professionally. It's one among 30 interns, and I believe I was the only paid one. I think because they did some sort of affirmative action program. So from there, my mentor and one of the women who recruited me, my mentor is actually a Morehouse graduate. The woman who recruited me sent me an email saying, "Hey, I think you should join this graduate fellowship. Look into it." I send this to everybody who does the program. So I looked into it, and it talked about diplomacy, and I thought this is really interesting. I don't have enough IR experience. I would go to grad school before this and get to like fully dig into IR. So let me take this opportunity. I'm really interested in just going abroad. I'd already done a study abroad in Ghana for a summer. So I applied. I gave up my precious spring break to go and interview. It's my only spring break that I could afford. And I gave it up to do the interview, got in, then went to American University School of International Service, where I earned my master's in international peace and conflict resolution and graduated in 2018, graduated diploma in 2016. In between that, it was a very difficult time. I, again, came from a very hyper-productive environment, which was extremely supportive at the same time. It's all Black, it's mostly Black, it's mostly women, to then going into a predominantly white institution, a PWI. That was a big culture shift for me, and not out of not a weakness of my own, but rather a critique of predominantly white institutions. I think the culture is a bit counterintuitive, counterproductive, and not really supportive of like the whole of the student body, or genuine to, especially the nature of international relations, which deals with all over the world, is very Euro. I went from a very Afrocentric space to a very Eurocentric space and very male-centric space. So I struggled a bit. I ended up graduating a semester later because of that. I was actually kicked out of school. I failed one semester. I spent another summer home feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm messing up. I ended up petitioning and digging down and, doing some meditation and biking and all these different things. Fought my way back into the school, graduated then that semester with a 4.0, and went on to become the commencement speaker for my class. That was very exciting. It was a surprise for my parents. It was just like a gift to them. Like, thank you for supporting me while going through like this incredibly difficult time. And then a month later, I joined the US Foreign Service. I've been on 2 tours and that's it. Oh, sorry, you're muted.
All right, sorry about that. Shadi, let me ask you this. You mentioned applying for a fellowship, but I don't know which one. Was it
I did the
Rangel,
Charles B. Rank.
Pickering? Okay, so you are a Rangel Fellow.
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you for that clarification. And when you say IR, you're talking about international relations.
Yes.
Okay, beautiful. Now, you've completed 2 tours of duty in the Foreign Service.
Yes.
Tell us about your first tour of duty.
My first tour was very interesting. I am my cone or my specialization for people who are listening to this. There are 5 of them. Mine is public diplomacy. But everybody within their first 2 tours has to do what's called a consular tour, where you deal with American citizen services and visas. And that was my tour in Mexico. I was in Hermosillo, which is a not really a smallish town. It's just a very spread out town, desert town in the north. And 3 months after my tour, 3 months after I arrived to Hermosillo, the pandemic started. And that was incredibly difficult because I had already accepted that this was make your own fun tour. They didn't have too much going on. Out of the, I don't know, like 80 different placements, I think it was like 11 for me. It wasn't too high, wasn't too low. I really wanted Mexico City like everybody, but I'd already accepted like, okay, Sade, you're just gonna have to make your own fun. And then when the pandemic happened, we were inside. There's no way to make your own fun, really. You had to just I spent a lot of time alone. I'm not married, I'm child free, I have a cat. So me and this cat looked at each other for months on end. And it actually worked out in my favor. I don't particularly like consular work and I had a lot of nerves about doing consular work in a border country um, where there's a lot of political tension. This was during the Trump administration. So I felt pretty uncomfortable sometimes, even though I found my groove. Doing visas, the average was supposed to be around 100 visas a day. We had scaled back to way less than that during the pandemic. We spent a lot of time home. Because during that time, I was able to do what I really wanted to do was public diplomacy. And in doing that, I felt more comfortable doing this job. I'd even considered like, why am I doing this? I don't enjoy visas. What if I don't get a PD tour next? Am I gonna keep doing visas? Um, I freaked out, but I found a lot of purpose in American citizen services, doing passports, just helping Americans in some really difficult times. And that was very rejuvenating for me. Towards the end of my tour, travel had opened up a bit. It was also a blessing. I was so close to the US that I was able to go be a bridesmaid and see family and, welcome my sister into college where she went to Spelman College. She just graduated. And I was able to retreat to Mexico City often. So I ended that tour on a much higher note than the first half of it. And yeah, that was it.
I've served in Mexico twice, both times on the border. And I
Okay. And where, CDJ or?
No, actually, my first tour was in Tijuana, Baja California Norte, and then I
Okay.
also served as the principal officer in Matamoros.
Okay.
Yeah, and the consular work it can be grueling, but
Demanding.
oh, so very important,
Yeah.
so and I characterize it by saying that we have our citizens from birth. When a US citizen is born abroad, we document them to death. When an American citizen dies abroad, and we help when there's no family to step in and settle the estate.
Exactly that.
So it's important work. But you know what? Having served in all five cones, PD is my first and only love, I must tell you. Do tell us about your second tour.
Yes. And let me add, if I can, on the consular part, exactly what you're saying. It's incredibly important. Um, I think I learned how important it was during the pandemic, where a lot of people weren't able to farm. Frankly, the US food supply chain would have collapsed without what we now know as Mexican labor. So that was a shock to me. And when put in that context, I felt a lot more purpose in my job as well. And then reflected a lot on just the American agricultural industry and the notion of immigrants taking our jobs as opposed to American farms and corporations maybe not wanting to support American labor. Um, so I want to add that caveat that I really admire a lot of the Mexican workers that I granted visas to. It's a hard job. Um, okay, to talk about my second tour, my beloved tour. Is what I just ended. I'm actually on at the end of home leave. On Monday, I start my third tour. So my second tour was to be the Deputy Public Affairs Officer at U.S. Embassy Monrovia, Liberia, West Africa. This was extremely exciting for me. I was finally going to do PD. I was going to be in West Africa. I knew from my last tour, socially, I needed to be around an African diaspora of some sort, if not Africa itself, somewhere else in the world, or maybe a Muslim majority space. I'm Muslim, so that was something that I really wanted to just benefit socially from because that wasn't there in my last post. And it was enriching overall. I learned so much, and I learned a lot about being resourceful. My posts, like a lot of posts in Africa, was understaffed, and I was one of two American officers for a 10-person section. So everybody else was locally employed staff for LES. One of them was an EFM hire, which is an emergency or eligible family member, who was a former journalist and American and joined our team. So that was a bit difficult being a two American or USDH, US direct hire team managing this team, and then being in a medium embassy. It's a pretty small team for a medium-sized embassy in a country that has such heavy demands.
Sade, when you say medium size, what are you talking about in terms of the American staff?
Oh, I don't want to misquote.
Well, there were several, I would imagine, federal agencies present, state,
Yeah,
AID, maybe commerce.
yeah. Mostly just state and USAID for the most part. I want to say maybe 100 USDH, but that might be like a gross estimate. I have to look at the numbers. Um, so yeah, it was a bit difficult managing resources at a post like that. But I personally just found the culture so beautiful, the people so amazing, and my work very interesting. I had the cultural portfolio, even though we're a two-person team, my public affairs officer, my supervisor, he had the information side, which is much more press and journalism and communications. And from my side, it was more US exchanges and like cultural events. We ended up doing both because one person's out, you got to do it. In fact, my first day that I started, my supervisor was sick and had COVID, and I was acting the day that I got there, and had to host an event at the ambassador. I had the art and embassies event at the ambassador's residence that same week as well, and that was my welcome to post. So I was definitely drinking from the fire hose, but again, I just can't say enough beautiful things about Liberia. It's not only intriguing on a historical point, our bilateral relationship, the U.S. What I think a lot of people, and then I'll add, these views are my own. Everything I'm saying is my own. Um, Liberia was founded by the American Colonization Society. A lot of people don't want to say that it was a colony of the US, but it was founded by formerly enslaved African Americans from the States in 1822, a lot of whom died because they couldn't acclimate to the weather or the environment. A lot of whom who were pushed out of the now capital because they were settling on indigenous land, and a lot of whom created a hybrid culture and became sort of Liberian American. Americal Liberian is what they were called at the time. Now they're called Congo people. Um, and I found just the layers of that and how that has transformed now through um, time, through wars, American wars, how Liberia supported the US during American wars, serving as bases, military bases, but also through Liberia's own very devastating 14-year long civil war, what the country looks like and what our relations look like. But I found life-changing, beautiful connection with Liberians there. The hospitality, the food, the weather, everything was very beautiful despite some intense workload. And I felt immense purpose in my job there, granting people the opportunity to go to the US and study on US exchange programs, granting people the opportunity to interact with some of our American staff to pitch their business as entrepreneurs, to train journalists, to highlight our cultures, to host like a beatbox, American beatbox group and talk about like hip hop as an American art form, to do a program I'm quite proud of called Gumbo Diplomacy, where we talked about how gumbo, which means okra in a lot of different West African languages, came from West Africa to the US, specifically in Louisiana, and became this fusion of French and Creole and indigenous and African cuisines, and then has come back to Liberia in some way with the Black settlers from the US, and sort of mirrors their indigenous cooking as well. I could go on and on and on about the layers of culture that I just find so intriguing there. But my time there was incredibly rewarding, and I think anybody who knows me would also say that.
You were there during their recent elections. Would you care to comment
Correct.
at all about that?
Tell you more about that?
Would you care to?
Sure.
Your work involve supporting elections?
Yeah, so my work around the elections, a lot of it was in the lead up to the elections. So uh, one of them, well, a part of my portfolio is working with youth. So we'd worked with a youth debate organization called Youth for Change, who is led by now an alum of our US exchange programs. At the time, he wasn't. And we organized a multi county debate championship. So this debate team went from county to county to county, where we had our American Spaces, which is also under my portfolio. For those who don't know, American Spaces are information and culture hubs that teach about American culture, that have a lot of American literature, but are also safe spaces or third spaces. They serve as often libraries, but also venues for training and different events for the community. So one of those events was for these debate tours. We had high school aged children debating on topics relating to democracy. So some of it was about, women participating in the elections. How do we get youth more involved in caring about the outcome of the elections? How do we handle people being a bit disillusioned by rampant corruption in the country? How do we get people more active? So that was a wonderful program. One of the schools that won is a Muslim majority school in Monrovia called United Ummah Dawa, and they were very impressive. They adapted with very little time to certain questions because we had adjusted some of the questions. But yeah, it was incredibly fruitful. Let's see. We also did a program called the Media Mentorship Program. We flew in an former American journalist, now professor based in Paris, to teach journalists on misinformation, disinformation, um, how to analyze different political situations, how to report on sensitive matters as well. That was something that was really needed if in the case of any electoral violence or gender-based violence in the lead up to the elections. So it was 30 people who participated in the program, and then we went up country and trained radio journalists as well. That's how most people consume media in Liberia. Um, and on the day of the elections, I, along with my supervisor and a couple local staff, served as the eyes and the ears on the ground. I managed the social media, took pictures, uh, yeah, drafted all the captions for Facebook, worked with the US UN ambassador who's now Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield, who was the former ambassador to Liberia. So it was a bit of a homecoming for her, and we had to manage that aspect of it as well. So I worked with her press team to arrange for the social media on that. It was very exciting. Let's see, there was so much. I really could go on. Please tell me to stop if you have another follow-up question.
No, I won't because you're giving us a sense of the nature of the work, and that's what I wanted you to talk about. What were the challenges and what were the opportunities of serving in Liberia?
Mhm. So I would say that's one of the challenges. Liberia is the most pro-American country in Africa, just by nature of our bilateral history. Liberia also suffers from corruption, and it is felt in every single aspect of society, down to just going to the market and trying to get some. Um, and because of that, our relationship has to be handled delicately because we want to work with them. They're very pro-American, and they are located in West Africa amidst a background of democratic backsliding. There was, you know, multiple concurrent coups in West Africa over the past couple years. Um, and you have to take advantage of and truly appreciate the relationship that we have with Liberia. Not much so take advantage of, but appreciate that relationship and work with them as much as they're working with us. That can be difficult when the country is so corrupt and the people who you're having dinner with and talking about a future with and wanting to support in the newspapers the next day, it turns out that they embezzled how much money or somebody was wrongfully fired or it can be difficult. And I say that I really enjoyed my time because I filled it socially. I supplemented a lot of that socially, learning from my first tour. I think a lot of Americans at the embassy struggled with that. I think that's something that people struggle with in general. And it makes sense. You work very hard, you believe in a future, you believe in a change, you give people grant money, you go out, you're on these terrible roads, you're spending nights in mosquito infested spaces, eating not the food you're used to. I love the food, but a lot of Americans are eating food that they're not used to and don't really want to deal with, and hot temperatures and rainy weather. And then 2 months later, you check up on the group that you gave the money to maybe like train farmers or to build a road, and you find that the road isn't built, farmers aren't trained, nothing's really done. That can be, I don't want to discredit any of my former colleagues, like that can be extremely draining. And I think a lot of people went through that. So those are the challenges. It's really the corruption. It was a terrible investment environment. Um, and that was sad to see from a cultural standpoint because during my time there, we'd celebrated the year that I got there, we'd celebrated the bicentennial, which is the 200-year anniversary from 200th year mark since the settlers came to Liberia. So it's 2022, it was 1822. And you would think that they would have had the same year of return, if not in a more grand fashion, than what happened in 2019 in Ghana. You would think that this is truly the point of return for African Americans. Not every African American is from Ghana, from West Africa generally, but this Liberia was founded for a lot of different reasons. But if we're to look on the more optimistic side, as a Pan-African haven for the African diaspora to come back and reclaim a homeland. There are a lot of different pessimistic takes on it, and some of those I share. But if we're talking from a cultural standpoint on like a year of return, that would have been amazing. But because of the corruption, because of investment, because of poor infrastructure that was devastated through the Civil War, that just wasn't possible. So those are definitely challenges there.
And so now you're on the threshold of your third tour. And if I got you right, you're going to be serving in Washington at the State Department.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Okay, so like every tour, you kind of don't know until you start. So I'll give you what I'm sure I'll be doing some of. Um, I'll be a press officer for the International Security Non-Proliferation Bureau, housed at Main State. Everybody says Main State, Harry S. Truman Building on C Street. And I'll be also working within the unit of Congressional Public Affairs. So I'll be dealing with simply a lot of press, a lot of security matters, which is in the headlines every single day. I really wanted to do more information work for my last tour. Doing so much culture work, I found it really rewarding to train journalists and liaise with the press. I liaise with the press frequently, actually, for the U.S. side of the presidential elections in Liberia. So I knew I even wrote an article for State Magazine on the Liberian elections and the U.S. ambassador's visit there. So I definitely wanted to like get my feet wet in press a bit more. This was a perfect opportunity. It was either I go to the Middle East or I go to DC because I want to be back home. I've been gone for 2 years. I've been gone for two tours, 4 years total. Um, and since October 7th, 2023, it seemed just less and less likely that I would be able to go comfortably and with full confidence that I'd be able to support the mission, any mission I join, and do my job representing the US. So I decided to come home. We'll see what exactly the details of the job are. I know they say that it's a very women-led office. It's mostly civil service, which is a bit rare. And I think I'd like to learn from having some more work-life balance, learning a bit more about the American press, learning how we cover security issues from Main State to the rest of the world. Yeah. And also learning about how we liaise on security matters with other foreign countries because we sometimes you go out and do trainings on like security or anything like that in other countries. The bureau that I was working with, or the bureau that I will be working with, actually did a training in Liberia right right before I had left, maybe a month or so before I had left. So it was very interesting to like meet my future colleagues before I left Liberia. So yeah.
Wonderful. Well, it sounds to me as though you've had a very rewarding and varied experience with the Department of State. I wanted
I
to
would say that, yeah.
I wanted to thank you for your candor. I wonder if we could return to that hiccup when you were at American University, because I think
Sure.
dealing with adversity, failure, and coming back from it shows real character. And if you'd like to unpack that a little bit more, I'm thinking about future generations as people listen to this and watch this recording. They might want to know a little bit more about what happened and how you coped, if you care to share.
Sure. I have no problem. The commencement speech is on YouTube. So if I don't talk about it here, somebody might just look it up there. Um, yeah, going from it's something that I think a lot of the population just can never relate to, frankly. Being in a space where your environment is not to be corny, but FUBU, like for us, by us, like it's meant for you. It's meant to support you. It has you specifically in mind. Um, to go into a space where the average student in mind looks nothing like me, sounds nothing like me, has none of the background that I have. And in fact, they doubt if a student that looked like me or had my background could thrive in that space. Now, I'm not saying that of my teachers, but I'm saying like the pedagogy of that space had that notion. Being in a predominantly white space, I just found that frankly so many white people spoke with astonishing authority about countries they'd never been to or they'd only studied during wartime. They'd only visited during wartime. They only know, the worst of it. And then go into another space and just speak with conviction about this space, speak very confidently. I found it very odd. And I found it odd that we were learning about other countries from Europeans, from former colonizers during a colonization era. These people, I often wonder, like, how are these people credible storytellers in this context of the entire world, that what a lot of people now call like the global majority, which are non-Europeans. I just found that really frustrating. And I guess the ego that comes with it, you kind of don't want to be challenged, you don't want to be wrong. I specifically remember there was a class that I was taking at AU where we had a full class. At the end of the class, the professor said, and that's how there wasn't really any racism in the north of the US. And he was like, okay, so see you guys later, and just ended the ended the class. I was astonished. I looked around like, wait, what? And thankfully I had another Spelman sister in the class with me. So I looked at her to say, did you just, and she looked like, yeah, that was crazy. So I raised my hand and disrupted a bit and said, I'm sorry, that that remark isn't necessarily true, that there was no racism in the north of the US. You mean during slavery? He's just talking about the Civil War, the US Civil War, and Union soldiers, um, and how a lot of people did seek refuge in the north of the US. But I had brought up, the way Wall Street was founded, the fact that me being from the Bronx Zoo had a human exhibit with a young African male as a part of it. There was slavery. If you look at even 12 years a slave, that was in the north of the US. So I just found it very odd that even when I had, I think, politely challenged that for such an egregious statement, um, he was very upset and heavily critiqued my writing, which was not the best. I wasn't I would say I'm a much better writer now. At the time, I was, senior level college writer. That was my first couple years of graduate school. So I had a lot of growth, a lot of growing to do. But that was from that moment on, that was a very difficult class. And I learned that even politely challenging people with facts, I offered to give him facts, I offered to give him resources. He wasn't receptive of that. I will give credit to the professors who were very receptive to any correction that I had. I had two professors whose syllabi I actually edited to include authors of color um, because we were speaking on international relations, and they appreciated it. I didn't really get any extra credit for it. I just was like, I don't want to read from these old Europeans about India. Can we like just read from an Indian about that perspective? And they appreciated it, and I found a lot of purpose in that as well. I still failed. It was so overwhelming. The amount of work you have to do in grad school is not really meant to be just you by yourself. And the group that I formed, the friend group that I formed, who we supported each other, we all looked around, and I had to point this out to them. Okay, we're all people of color. And they kind of looked around. Not all of them were Black. All of them looked around and was like, oh yeah, I wonder why. And we were the last study group formed of our class. And I sort of helped them to connect the dots that, hey, we've all asked to be a part of a lot of other people's study groups. And they kind of say, in a way, no, or you're not welcome, or they don't just go silent or don't really communicate with us. We are the leftovers of study groups, of people who don't have study groups in our class. Now, thankfully, this was a very brilliant group. We worked extremely hard. And the study groups that didn't want us, after we put together all of these like incredible like 30-page study guides to tests, then asks for some of those resources. And they were going to give them. And I had to tell them, no, these people didn't want to work with you. By the way, like, you've never studied with them. They've never studied with you. Now that they know you put together this like master study guide, no, this is what people do. They try and take resources from you without wanting any sort of community. So I found it difficult learning that that community was so important because I just wanted to get done with school. It was very difficult working with people, dealing with constant microaggressions and sometimes macroaggressions. I specifically felt for the undergrads there because there was an instance where like a banana was thrown at some Black girls. There were nooses hung from the campus. Flags were burnt during the 2016 presidential elections. Like, it was just racial chaos at that school. Um, but when I failed out of a class because I wasn't also spending the time, again, coming from a hyperproductive place to a hyperproductive place, I wasn't taking the time to rest. I wasn't taking the time to laugh, to hang out, to sit in the sun, to do anything that I like painting and drawing, which is what I did growing up. And I burned myself out very quickly, very intensely. And it was through reclaiming a lot of that energy and affirming myself, saying, I deserve to be here. Some of these people here act like I've never done anything before, or I don't know what I'm talking about. I absolutely know what I'm talking about. I'm capable of doing this. And it was a very meditative summer that I was kicked out of school. I had to give up an internship in Malaysia where I would have roomed with my best friend, who is also a Black woman FSO now, and we were in the same fellowship together. Um, and I had to lie to everybody and say, I didn't feel well this summer. I had to go. But I spent a lot of time healing during that time and saying, what do I want? Because I don't enjoy this, but I enjoy the content of it. There's something to be said about um, learning about our place in the world, not just as an American citizen, but as a global citizen. And I really saw my time there, and my pursuit of knowledge from the perspective of a global citizen who would then represent the US. And I wanted to have a much more holistic perspective. So that's when I went back in, when I finally like wrote all these petitions. I had to humble myself and ask people to write recommendations for me and vouch for my character. And came back and crushed it that next semester. I came at it with a much more global citizen perspective and feeling much more purpose rather than, oh, I'm getting a master's. Like, no, I'm earning this master's and I'm doing it so that I have the knowledge and I feel more equipped to do what I believe is a very important job representing the US as a Black woman, child of an immigrant from New York, HBCU educated, and all the other intersectioning identities. So yeah, I felt like that triumph was pretty important. They sent out an email from American University on you volunteer for commencement speaker. It's not the valedictorian that does it. So I was wondering like, oh, should I tell people that this happened? This is a little embarrassing, but also I feel great that I was able to do this. And I don't want anyone, and I especially felt for the undergrads because I was just them just a year and a half, a couple of years before, who had had such a racially difficult time. Um, and I wanted other people to know, especially the white student body, that this was not an easy time. And you should be looking out for people who don't look like you or come from the same background as you to sort of understand where your privilege lies and where you might be um, hurting their experience in a space where you both deserve to be in. So talked to again my best friend who had gone to Malaysia. I ended up doing my internship at the U.S. Embassy in Jakarta in the political section, so it was fine the following year. And she said, "Yes, you should definitely do it." I did it. I gave a speech on embracing the highs and the lows of that experience during grad school. The lows being depressed, being anxious, being hyper productive, not taking being in a predominantly white space, adjusting to that, to then embracing the highs, taking action to make the best of my experience and to really connect with a community who admittedly I didn't see myself being friends with. I was used to just being around Black women all the time. So I was like, these people aren't my friends. I don't know these people. They don't get me. And some of those people loved and embraced and understood me in ways that I didn't think were possible. So it was a highlight of my life, really, just graduating from that school.
Thank you so much for sharing. Sade, if you could take a moment to speak to the future, to talk to the young people who may access this recording in the future, about what you see for the profession, what the challenges and opportunities may be, and why they might want to pursue a career in diplomacy and play the angel's game.
Mm. I think diplomacy is one of the best ways to understand your own country. I work with people from every part of the country, from several different backgrounds, who have a lot of different perspectives. Everybody says the strength of the US is its diversity, no matter the way that we became diverse, racially, ethnically, culturally, religiously, ideologically. Um, Overall, that's a strength. And I think learning how to represent a very diverse and massive country who's a superpower and that has a global footprint that, is it can't be understated, um, is a privilege and an honor. I find particular purpose in my job as a Black woman, um, in doing, especially in Liberia, in doing cultural work that tells the story of Black America and Black Americans' connection with the entire world, whether they know it or not. Black American culture is the greatest export of the US. hip hop, breakdance, rap, R&B, blues, jazz, graffiti, everything that you see in a lot of countries, especially going through turmoil or grasping for a sort of expression. I won't say everything, but a lot of it came from Black Americans who were also doing the same. Hip hop was born out of the socioeconomic critique of the US, the plight of the Black American, of the Latino Americans in New York, striving for greater building community. And no matter what direction whether it goes in that direction or not, how it ebbs and flows, I think that still holds true. And the fact that so many people find beauty in that, whether they know it's from Black America or not, is something worth representing and educating people on. Um, I found a lot of purpose in that. I think the future of diplomacy is, I don't know if I can say bright. I think this particular moment that we're in with what is being called a war between Palestine and Israel is sincerely hurting the morale of the US diplomatic force. A lot of people sincerely disagree with our government's approach. And I think it's making a lot of people feel uncomfortable with representing the US abroad. Now, regardless of that, I think, money and time and all of that, some people feel more compensated in the private sector. Maybe I will one day, I don't know. But I think there's just nothing more rewarding than going and you can just, it's like being at home. You can critique your cousins and your sisters and your brothers and say, oh, they're the worst. When you go outside and see truly like people's impact outside of the home, it's astonishing to see how much people love the US and for so many different reasons, and how many people have been able to come to this country and make a life, including my family, including my father's side of the family, who were able to come here and make a life for themselves. I think there's something incredibly beautiful in that, and to give that opportunity to other people across the world and connect with them and sometimes be the first point of connection as an American is really important. Politically, economically, culturally, immigration wise, there's so much to do. Um, and there's a lot of potential and purpose in that. I'll leave it at that. I think it is bright, but I know that our political situation right now can threaten the progress and the face of the diplomatic corps going forward.
Thank you so very much for finding the time to invest in this project. I'm speaking from the heart to say thank you. I really appreciate it.
Of course, of course. If I can leave on just an uplifting note, if there are any future generations listening to this now, um, I would just encourage people to try it. Diplomacy isn't something you just try, you just fall into. It's very difficult to get into, and it can be difficult to do your job when you go abroad, but that's any job. Um, there is so much purpose and beauty in traveling this world and learning more about your identity as a global citizen from the US, that I think everybody deserves that. And it's a necessary growth as an adult. So I really hope people look into the US Foreign Service as a career path. And if not, they find another way to be a global citizen abroad.
Please.
Okay, one additional note. Thanks for taking the time. Sometimes people ask why, as a Black woman, you would want to become a diplomat and represent the US on a global scale. Um, and I hope other people share this sentiment with me, other Black female foreign service officers, that I feel like I am a accurate representation of this country. I'm the child of an immigrant and the child of a mother who comes from a U.S. territory, um, in New York, which is, you know, the most international city, from every culture all over the world. I have several veterans in my family, um, who've sacrificed a lot to serve the U.S. Um, and I think so, speaking again to the diversity of the U.S., so much of my story may not be the quintessential American, what people think of abroad, but it is very American in its essence. And I see myself as uh, an accurate representation of the U.S. And when people question why would I often question, why wouldn't I? Am I not American enough as well? So I just wanted to add that in there, hoping that future generations hear this, and other Black women who might be interested in the field also see themselves through that lens. That's
Thank
it.
you so very much.